Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Kraft, and this is Adam Sanchez.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Adam. So, our channel is called Enlightened Connections, and the title of this video is Processing the Truth When Nothing Makes Sense. And the reason that Adam and I wanted to make this video is that there's a lot of information coming out nowadays, and people are rejecting some of the truths that come out. And we've noticed that people have a hard time accepting things that are coming out in the news that are actually true. Obviously, a lot of us know that there's a debate out there with fake news and real news and what's true and what's real. And it is a theme and a topic that we want to bring forward to discuss some of the psychology behind processing truth and why it's hard for us to accept truth and what's real, even when it's presented to us. And so, why don't you talk a little bit, Adam, about truth itself?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a great intro. I think it's a really important topic in this day and age, especially in the information age. You know, information is available at the moment's notice, and oftentimes it can be overwhelming. There's so much information, especially if we don't know what's true, what's not true. A lot of the times it can just shut us down, and we don't even want to deal with the whole subject altogether. And so, first thing I think that's the most important to clarify is that truth itself is not relative. Now, there's, this talk in the spiritual community is kind of like this conjecture, and not to say that this is invalid. There's some truth to the fact, my truth may be different than your truth. So for my truth, whatever, we don't even have to go into examples, but there are cases where that's true. And there are cases where it's not subjective or relative at all. And this is very simple. You can know that something is true by the sheer fact that it has happened. It transpired. It took place, and therefore it is true. There's no conjecture about that. There's no woo-woo uncertainty. Something happened, therefore it's true. So it's not relative. It's not up for debate. It's not about opinion. It's about fact versus non-fact. So when we're talking about things on that level, it is possible to know the truth. It is possible to know that something happened and it's true, and something didn't happen and it's false. So that's what we want to keep in mind when we're talking about these news stories, because there is a lot of propaganda, there is a lot of deception, there is a lot of fake news, but it's about discerning where that falsity is coming from, what's true, what's not. And we're going to talk more about why we may not want or be able to accept the truth when it's presented to us. And that's more about the psychological components that Stephanie was just mentioning.
Yeah, and so about the propaganda. So during the Obama administration, he passed a law that made propaganda legal. This means that things can be published in newspapers, or I guess even spoken out loud on the news that is not real, it's not true, and that is within the law now. And the other, well, that's, I guess, all I wanted to say about that. But should we just delve right into our main topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the reason that Adam and I wanted to make this video is that we do know some truths that are out there that we are witnessing people having a very hard time accepting as truth, and they are rejecting it as propaganda. And we feel that it's important for people to know some of the things that are true, because we really want to create a better world. And if more people know what is true, then we can grow our group of the population toward working for what is good for humanity. So what is good for humanity, we want peace, we want freedom, we want safety, we want to feel protected, and that we are, funding the charities and the organizations that are good, and that we're voting for the people that are not corrupt. But if we don't know about those things, if we believe that the portrayal of those people and those organizations and charities, if we believe how they're being portrayed, we might be funding nefarious organizations and people and governments because we don't know. And so really we want to open this discussion up to see behind the veil. What is that organization really doing with the money? What is that elected official really doing with that power? And so that's the reason we want people to see more truth, and so that we can help better the world. So we're going to get into some kind of heavy topics. That was the lead up to it, but we're not going to get into like using a lot of terminology that could be triggering or get us censored, so we're going to beat around the bush a little bit, but I think you're going to get the gist of what we're talking about, and we'll use enough words so that you do understand. And so there's been news that has come out that there is this worldwide ring of abuse that does involve children. So that's along the lines of what we're addressing today. And I'm going to go through my process of finding out about this firsthand, not as a victim, but as someone was revealing her testimony. So I heard firsthand from a victim, and growing up, she grew up in a family of ritual abuse. And this was the first time I had ever heard of anything like this, that it was real, that families do raise children in these cults, and that this type of abuse actually does happen. I had never heard of such horrible things, and I'm not going to say the things that I heard, but what I heard in great detail caused me to have PTSD, and in my form of PTSD from that, I was having flashbacks and intrusive thoughts and visions based on what she told me. So I was sort of reliving the damage to my psyche, the shock to my psyche that happened when I heard her story. And this was in 2004. So that lived within me, and I didn't want it there, and it didn't stay like all the time, but it was severe when it happened, because when we hear stories of severe abuse and torture and killing, these things can affect us deeply. It's very difficult to hear. So fast forward to 2016. Actually, I'm going to say what happened to me in 2016. I had been off of Facebook for a year and a half, and I had gotten rid of my TV in 2009, and I don't read newspapers, so I wasn't following any news in the world. I was naive. I wasn't paying attention. I was doing my own thing as if the rest of the worldly news wasn't happening. And that was nice break. But something interesting happened in the spring of 2019. So remember, we had the elections coming up in November of that year. So in the spring of 2016, I really didn't know who was running for president. I wasn't paying attention. My son came home from school one day, and I said, "What did you do at school today?" And he said, "We talked about who's running for president." And I said, "Oh, who's running?" That's showing how not interested I am in politics, or was, and how much I didn't care, about these things. But for a period of time, I could say. So he told me he was running, and I had heard, Clinton, I had heard Trump. I felt like I was living in a fantasy world, like not a good one, because I couldn't fathom that these two people were actually running for president. I mean, I could understand Clinton, but Trump was like, what world am I living in? Because this was bizarre to me, bizarre. But it was interesting, but this thing happened right around that time, a little bit after that. So I'm spiritual. I am a healer. I'm intuitive. That's my world. And I'm a medium. And so this spirit, I could say spirit, who knows what it was, started showing up in my field and telling me something really big news is about to come out about Hillary Clinton. It is going to completely devastate her supporters. It is going to be so shocking. It is going to be so dark and evil, and it's really bad, and it's about to happen. Now, this voice, it wasn't a voice, but this information just came to me. Well, something pushed me to get on Facebook after a year and a half of not being on. So I reactivated my account, and it was right at the moment that the nomination had been stolen from Bernie. The DNC corruption was happening. And I just open up Facebook, and this stuff is happening. I didn't even know who Bernie Sanders was. No idea. I never heard him speak. But I came in, that's when I came in to the game, and I was observing. And then in the fall, the WikiLeaks emails came out. And when I read them, when I saw what they were saying, it brought back my PTSD from having heard about that woman's ritualistic abuse and what she had witnessed happening with babies and things. So when I read the Podesta, we weren't going to say the name, were we? But we won't get flagged, I don't think, for this video. But we're trying to stay on the air, people, right? On the airwaves. So when I read these emails that involved, them, Clinton and Mr. P, and more, Obama ordering $65,000 worth of hot dogs, in a plane to the White House. If you want to look up what the FBI states the code word for hot dogs is, go right ahead. All the information is out there for you. Yeah.
Just as a side note, it's also not allowed as part of their policy in the White House to have outside food. They have a kitchen underneath the Oval Office. So if that's the case, why are they ordering outside food at all? So just putting that there.
You are correct about that. It is a huge risk to the president to order food from the outside. They have their own chef. They have their own, for security measures, we can understand this, and it's true. So because I had heard of such terrible abuse, and I was reading these same type of things happening within government, and I had already found out about it. I'll go back to that story a little bit later, after this, but I knew it was true. So actually, I'll go back to that. So before the emails came out in 2009 or 10, the entire thing was revealed to me, what this involved. This ring we're talking about with government, the UN, Hollywood, agencies like CPS, adoption agencies. It goes, it's FBI, CIA, police. It's worldwide, and it's deep, and it's linked up so that it's all connected and working as a huge operation. Well, I had found out great details about this, in great detail, so that when the WikiLeaks emails came out, I already knew so much about it. I knew so much about it. And so I knew it was true. I mean, no doubt, but it was hard for me to process that, again, because my PTSD was coming up with the intrusive thoughts and the flashbacks from the details I had heard. So that was my process. And luckily, you know, and I didn't want this. I was like, go away, go away, go away. If you've ever had, you know, intrusive thoughts, you don't want them. And luckily for me, one day I woke up and they were gone and I was free. And the emotional charge of what had really damaged my psyche and shocked me so deeply, well, I was free from that. So I'm happy and I'm grateful that I can speak about this without the emotion, without even the flashbacks or anything that I've known about it, so that I can be very balanced in being able to deliver this information to other people. I don't want to traumatize other people. That's not why I am talking about this. But Adam and I really want to talk about why it's hard to process this truth and what goes on within our minds. So just to finish up this interesting, I think it's interesting, the story about the Clinton thing, how that voice or that spirit was coming and telling me this really big thing is about to come out. It's going to devastate everyone. It felt like everyone would believe it, and it would turn everyone to see the truth about her, Clinton, and they would be devastated because they were her supporters, and they would believe it. But what happened as soon as those WikiLeaks emails hit, the mainstream media immediately put out their stories of fake news. This is fake. It's illegal to read, the WikiLeaks emails. This is, it's not true. And so the people who watching that, they believed what the media said and probably didn't even look at the WikiLeaks emails and thought, well, that's fake news. That's propaganda. That's against Trump, which the timing of it is interesting, but that information that I was told that was about to come out, well, that was it. And guess what? It didn't work. It worked to some degree, meaning a lot of people did see the truth, but a lot of people, it made them even more defensive against the truth, because what they saw was that all this information, these articles are coming out about this topic, and it's all fake. It's all lies. So they don't look at it. So it made the situation even worse, because these are children that are being abducted and tortured. Let me just take a sip of water. And so for humanity, adults, to turn their back on these kids, it's of great concern, because there are a lot of us who know it's true, and we just want people to be able to start to process truth. Because now, like yesterday, the IG report came out, and on page 294, it states that the Clinton Foundation was involved with crimes against children. So with this information coming out now, and people wanting to turn a blind eye and say, once again, there's the attack on the Clintons, there's the propaganda, there's the lies, and they're using children, to lure us in so that we care. Well, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to keep being blind to this and not pay attention and believe there's an agenda to this, when in fact it is true. And there is some, there's a little note I want to make about the CIA. They created the word or the term conspiracy theory, I think it was in the 60s, and it was to, anytime pieces of truth would come out into the public, they would then attach the term conspiracy theory to it to brainwash the population to say, only crazy people are going to think about that. That's true. That's not true. That's not true. That's a conspiracy theory. So they started labeling all these things, and it worked. And so now today we have people, with certain topics that come up, that's a conspiracy theory. And that became, a term that's negative, to deter people away from truth. And why don't you, Adam, tell us about Operation Mockingbird?
Yes, absolutely. And also to point out just the simple semantics of it, a conspiracy literally means a plan between two or more people to achieve a specific result. That's all a conspiracy is. So there's conspiracies happening every day in the business world. They're not necessarily nefarious. Oftentimes they can be. And when we're talking about these situations, we know that there are conspiracies happening every day all over the world in the government. And, dark conspiracies like some of the ones that we're talking about right now. And the Operation Mockingbird from the CIA was deliberate manipulation of the media mouthpiece to achieve their own ends. They knew that the power of propaganda was very influential in terms of swaying the public towards specific results, towards specific, narratives of the war games or plans that they had, for whatever reasons. So that's something to keep in mind, and that's very much currently in activity through the media, through Hollywood even. The military industrial complex actually collaborates with the Hollywood machine to specifically put out, images or, messages or whatever. And that's something that we saw way back with the Sony emails being leaked even before, the Wikileaks. So, this stuff has been going on for a long time. And it begs the question, why do we feel inclined to ignore clear and present danger? Why do we feel, inclined to just deny the truth when it presents itself to us? And this is a really important question, because there's so many aspects to our psyche, and in a lot of cases, the fragility of it. So we need to ask ourselves this question, why might one not be willing or ready to accept the truth? And it often comes down to, a sense of security or lack thereof, fear usually being the first and biggest reason, that it's too scary. It's too overwhelming to accept that this negative thing could be true. And so it's just easier to deny. Denial is one of the most predictable mechanisms of the human psyche. Whenever there's a challenge that's presented to it that's just overwhelming, denial. Nope, not going to touch that, not going to look at it, not even going to, legitimize it with any sort of opinion or reality. And then you even had mentioned, Stephanie, PTSD. A lot of people are traumatized for whatever reasons. Maybe they're war veterans, maybe they had a hard life, a hard childhood. These traumas can actually keep us from being emotionally capable of processing the scary, difficult parts of the world or reality, or even of our own lives and our own selves. And so, it goes even deeper. We mentioned the Operation Mockingbird. There's a lot of social engineering and propaganda that's deliberately making the truth difficult to swallow, because people have been fed the lie for so long that they're invested in that. I think it was Mark Twain who said, it's much harder it's easier to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled. So once, people buy the propaganda, they're more likely to stick with it, even though it's blatantly false, simply because it's easier to remain identified with that. It's also challenging to admit that, you made a mistake and you were wrong about where you gave your faith or trust. And a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people don't want to admit to themselves that they were wrong about something, especially something as important as the topics that we're bringing to the discussion today. So there's also a little bit of idolatry and codependency elements happening here that I'd like to mention. And it's kind of weird, right? Idolatry, what does that mean? It's like, you're idolizing, people tend to idolize religious figures, movie stars, even political figures and newscasters. There can be this sense of putting people on a pedestal and not wanting to see the truth about that person. And that connects to that codependency I just mentioned, because idolatry, I think, in itself is a form of codependency, because you're putting someone else outside of you on a pedestal, making them better than yourself, which makes you automatically less than. And you are dependent or codependent on that relationship, even if it's just in your mind, even if you don't even know the person personally. You're going to feed that image that you have of them in your mind, because somehow it bolsters your own sense of self. Maybe because you identify with them, you see a part of yourself in them that you think they're great, so you just only want to see those good parts and don't want to look at the bad parts, because then what would that mean about yourself if you've been connecting with that person? So these are some of the psychological pitfalls that can come up, and I think it's really important to ask ourselves questions as we are presented with what may or may not be true. How does this feel to me? Am I having reactions? Why? What's my relationship to this information? And why? And then see what comes up and just observe. Just observe your responses to the information and the stimulus, and then take it step by step.
Yeah, and something that's really common, like for me, is that I project goodness onto everyone and everything because I'm good, and we usually think that others are like us. And so it's especially hard for people like me to actually accept that these things are actually happening. And these people that we have admired can be that dark, evil, and bad, and doing these things, participating in these things. So what happens when we're presented with that information is something called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is when you see something presented to you that's happening, and your mind can't handle that could be true. So you dissociate and you tell yourself, that's not happening, that's not true. And your mind will create reasons, why it's not happening, why it's not true, and that it isn't happening. And there's a disconnect. And then with your story that you've created now, that doesn't exist. And so even though you have seen it. And so that's what happens when someone reads the Wikileaks emails, literal emails between people, pages and pages of them. And even if they look up the FBI terminology for, are we going to say the word? Probably not. We don't even need to say the word. And it matches. But no, then they have to tell themselves, but no, that's too bad. That's too much badness, evil, right? Because I'm projecting my good nature onto them. So right now I'm shutting this down because there's no way they could do that. That's not real. That isn't what it means. That's not what they're saying. So I've just cut off the truth from my reality, and I'm going to go over here and live in a fantasy bubble, and I'm not criticizing anybody. This is survival and protective of our psyche to do this, and our emotions. So I'm going to go over here and live in a bubble where that doesn't exist, and my world is still good. So my world is a world where the government wants good for the people. The money that's going into the government is for good purposes. This protective agency for children is to protect the children. When I call the police, they will protect me. This is not always true. And so this elected person that I'm voting for isn't a rapist, and so because in my world that I'm keeping and keeping very strongly is good, none of this is true. Now, it's 2018. We are in a time of a great awakening, and that's why Adam and I are making this video. It's because we want to help ease up and facilitate the ability to come out of that just peek out of that fantasy world and know and start to learn what's really happening in the world. Take off the blinders and give yourself a chance to contemplate what might be true and what might be happening. Why is it important? It's important because this is involving children and hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of them. And so why do we care? We care, well, okay, that's enough to care, right? That's enough to care. But Adam, you mentioned when we were chatting earlier that these children will grow up and these children will have children. There's a lot of trauma there and abuse. And then if we reincarnate, we're going to come right back into this world, into this place where so much trauma has happened. So of course we care right now about the children and what's happening right now, and we want to prevent further suffering. But you know, and that's why we care that the truth is seen, and we understand why the truth is not seen, why the truth is avoided, why it's dismissed as fake. We know. I mean, I told you my process, it took me years to process the information that I heard, years. And I don't know how, and I'm very blessed that I woke up one day without the trauma of it, without the emotion of it. It's gone. But I don't expect it to be that easy for other people. I even kind of woke up a woman that, I think it was this week, and she didn't sleep the entire night, and she was processing it, but she got it and she knows it's true. And you know, I feel that it's important for people to know it's true, because like I said, if we know, then we're not going to vote for that person, or we're not going to, you know, donate to that charity, or we're going to try together with the numbers that we are, more awakened numbers, then we're going to change the world and say, you know what, let's create it in a different way. Let's create our world in a new way, in a different way. We have the power. What do you have to say, Adam?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's the best point. You know, it's up to us, and that's why it's up to us to be able to accept and process the truth and then take action accordingly, you know, because if we continue to ignore the problem, it will only get worse. By accepting the problem, that's when it can actually start to get better. So, you know, I think you made some really excellent points there. And one thing that I want to add to all of that, you know, complexity of rejecting the truth and, you know, staying in the bubble of our own little world or our own identity. I want to use the term identity interchangeable with ego. You know, people think ego is a sense of grandiosity. Sometimes it can be, but ego is just the structure or the pattern of thoughts, beliefs, you know, that we have about ourselves, who we are, right? I am this person, I am this old, I have this job, I have, all that's the ego, right? Everything that we consider to be a part of our identity or our world, it's also a part of our worldview, right? It's how we view ourselves in the world. It's how we view the world in relationship to ourselves. So there's a big challenge that can happen within this cognitive dissonance, and it's essentially related to the ego, the attachment that we have to our identity or our own sense of self as being fixed only one certain way. And it couldn't possibly be any other way, because then we would have to deal with asking new questions. We would have to deal with growth. We would have to deal with evolution versus just the comfort and the stability of staying the same, even if it's actually not that comfortable, even if we live a life that pales into comparison to what's possible. It's still so familiar that it's very easy for people to just stay in that attachment of who they think they are, what they think life is all about. So I just want to point out that that's actually a function of the ego. And Stephanie, you mentioned it very accurately. It's a self-preservation mechanism. But we may know pretty clearly, right? Some people may already know that if you're in self-preservation, you're not capable of growth. So if you're only trying to stay in survival, you're not going to have the best quality of life. If we really want to do better for ourselves, for future generations, then we got to kind of pick up our bootstraps and do the work. And part of that is sometimes, you know, heavy emotional work or psychic, you know, soul searching work. And it's really about integrating that new truth with the old identity. You can still be who you are, but it's about creating or finding a new relationship to that information and how it fits in with you. And that's the tricky thing, I think, for a lot of people, is to be able to metamorph a little bit, enough to be able to access this information, say, oh wow, yes, it is true. Now what does that mean about me? Who am I in relationship to this new truth? What is my new truth in relationship to this information? And that can be tricky, but ultimately that's up to us. I would say the most important thing that we can address on this topic is to understand, even within the most dark and nefarious truths of existence, that it's not polarized, and that's one of the things about this systemic abuse, I think we could call it, right? That is paramount, is that it's specifically designed to disempower people and to disconnect them from the knowing, the understanding, the realization that there is good in the world. It's ironic because, some people live in the rose-colored glasses, but how can you really live in those rose-colored glasses when you see all the poverty, when you see all the war, when you see all the things that are going on in the world? It's a sense of denial. It's a sense of false positivity, right? It's falsehood, because it's not actually what's going on. Maybe it's, for you because that's what you choose. But again, it's like personal truth versus in actual truth. Now, when we're talking about transcending, integrating, unifying all these energies, once we can accept and understand that there are higher forces for good, that it may not be in the government, and maybe there are people in the government who are good, but maybe it's not all people. It's about understanding the nuances, understanding the truth is usually not black and white, right? That sometimes there are areas of gray, and being able to reconcile that, being able to accept that, and ultimately being able to trust that even in the face of all this nefarious, dark, hidden, occult energy, that there is something good, that there is something greater than that can lead us to the rectification and the solution. Just because we come across this really dark information doesn't mean that we're slaved to it, doesn't mean that we're disempowered by it, or that we have to remain disempowered by it. It can be very daunting for a lot of people, I think, to start to accept the scope of the darkness in the world. And that's why I think a lot of people have the issue. But if we can understand that darkness is just one part of the puzzle, that there is an equal and opposing, and often in most cases, stronger force for good and light and information and awareness, then we can actually rectify the situation, because we understand that not only is there a higher power, but I can actually access that higher power and work along with it. That higher power is me. It's within me too, in my ability to take action, in my ability to speak out, in my ability to give my gifts and my skills and my service to this challenge to help rectify it, rather than stick my head in the sand, pretend like it doesn't exist, and watch it, or deny watching it while it gets worse. So when we can connect with these, higher potentials, I think that's where the solution lies. And also the ability to integrate the more difficult information a bit more easily.
Yes. And two things about what you just said is, one of them is responsibility. So if someone is coming across this information and they might not be willing to admit that it's real, they might prevent themselves from believing it, because they would ask themselves, if I admit this is true, then what is my responsibility? What can I do? And if they feel like they're helpless, well, I can't do anything about this, so then I'm not going to believe it, because it's too much, it's too overwhelming, and I can't become responsible enough to do anything about it. And because that's shameful or hurtful to me, that I can't help, I'm not going to believe it. The other thing is, and the thing is, you don't have to do anything other than, I think that it's important to just acknowledge and know within it's true and happening, and then use your power. This is what you were talking about. Use your power of prayer and good intention to pray, to add light, to add love and protection to any situation that you feel needs it. And you have that power, and you are incredibly powerful, more powerful than you could ever imagine. And so begin to embody and know that power and use it. And that is what can change the situation. And that is what can change the world. And that is what can create a new world. And so that's why it's important to know, not to destroy your psyche, not to put you into PTSD, not to make you feel responsible that you need to take action. Because when it really comes down to it, what can you do? Not much, because these people will kill you. I mean, people who are standing up for it right now, who are more entrenched in it, who try to speak up and speak out about it, they're being killed. So I'm not saying we should tell people that this is true so that we can stop it in action. I'm saying what I just said is go within your heart and your soul and put a stop to it at the level of your soul, at the level of your command, at the level of your I do not consent. And your non-consent is protecting the children and protecting future harm. And so pray, send light, send love, do everything you can energetically. And this goes back to what you were just saying, Adam, is believing in that higher power and believing that we are one with it, and we can overcome and override these things that are happening. This is where our power is. And this is where it makes it easier for us to look at dark truths head on, admit that they're happening, and be able to do something about them.
Yeah, very, very well said.
So, do we have anything else to say?
I think you did really well covering that part. I may have one final point. I don't know if it's repeating myself or not, but just yeah, I mean, it can be physical, it can be spiritual. It doesn't really matter if you're taking action or not. It's about reconciling, coming to that inner peace, and then from there reclaiming your power. Because whether it's emotional or action oriented, getting in the right state of mind is where the empowerment lies. So I think we've addressed the topic pretty thoroughly. I hope that this information empowers people to live better lives and to navigate the world in a more effective way, so we can all just collectively support each other and really create the kind of world that excites and inspires all of us.
Yes, and about navigating the world, I'll make a final point too about that. When we are presented with information in the news, articles, videos, I think it's important, if we care about it, to look to if someone is presenting information and you immediately want to reject it because you think it's not true, I think it's worthwhile doing research. So reading that article, watching that video, whatever it is, and then going deeper, because there are reasons behind everything. So if you're interested in knowing truth, it's not always at the surface, and there are connections that will lead you from one connection to the next so that you can seek the truth about a situation and not believe just what the surface is telling you. There are things that, our current president is doing that on the surface can look very bad, can look like it's not helping. But, with a couple of the points or a couple of the things that he's done, I've been able to sort of uncover deeper reasons for them to then understand why the cover story is one way. But then because of all this stuff that's going on, there are deeper reasons for it. And so I think it's worthwhile to investigate and, not believe mainstream media, because that is corporate owned. That is actually owned by the CIA. So, or owned, but not, maybe not owned by the CIA.
Operated.
Operated, right, by the CIA and owned by corporations. And so they aren't telling the truth. I mean, whatever, it's almost to the point where whatever the mainstream media says, the opposite is true. So I would say, because we're making a video about trying to understand the truth, process the truth, and find the truth, that's a great place to start, which is not believing or buying into everything that the mainstream media is saying, and dig a little bit deeper. You know, not all alternative media news sources have an agenda on the right or the left. Some of them really are about truth, and it's hard to discern nowadays, but I don't even know how people will navigate through these sources when they don't know at this point. If they start with a clean blank slate and don't know what's true, yeah, it's a tough world out there. Do you have anything to say about that?
Sure. Yeah, I love how you brought it to a deeper level, the importance of research, and, you know, don't even take our word for this, right? Viewer watching this, like, do the research for yourself. Actually, you know, discover and delve into the depths of the truth, because the truth requires some depth to be able to receive most cases. And, you know, use your discernment. The truth is self-evident. It will present itself over time, especially if you're actually willing to be able to receive it, to open up to it, particularly if it's, you know, an uncomfortable truth. But it will connect also with other pieces, like Stephanie was mentioning. You know, it'll lead you down a path, and you'll see it will make more connections versus, you know, making everything more separate. The truth kind of explains layer after layer after layer, especially as you start pulling back the layers. Then you start to see how it's all interconnected and how all of it explains itself. Basically, it's sort of like, you know, self-corroboration almost. So use your discernment, use your patience. You don't even have to jump to conclusions, but keep an open mind and be willing to be wrong. I think that's really important. Be willing to be wrong and say, oh, okay, I was wrong about that. Doesn't mean anything about me. I'm ready and willing to learn what the truth is. So, you know, if you're committed to it, it will present itself to you, versus if you're committed to anything else, it won't.
Excellent point. I think that brings us to the end. And, you know, good luck, everyone.
Good luck to us all. Yeah, please. And if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, or, you know, stuff that you'd like to hear from us in the future, please send us a comment, like, share, subscribe to our channel. We're going to have a lot more information coming out, really for the liberation of consciousness and humanity in general, making all those enlightened connections, not just in our relationships, but within ourselves, right? Even in our mind, those enlightened connections. So thank you so much for watching, everybody. Thank you, Stephanie, for initiating this video. I think it's really amazing topic and so necessary right now. So I'm just really happy to have gotten this off my chest.
Me too. And thank you so much, Adam. Bye, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.